welcome to Carpool for School.
Welcome to Carpool for School.
Now, this is episode number 3 of the Matthew Hudd series.
And today we're going to be looking at the cognitive load theory and dual coding and try and iron out any misconceptions, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. I think that there is a huge promise in more conversations and better learning across the system about understanding a kind of broad range of things related to cognitive science, and a couple of things that you've mentioned there kind of fall into that category. So cognitive load theory, dual coding, interleaving, spaced practice, all of these are kind of very in right now in lots of conversations about education.
Yeah.
And I'm incredibly optimistic in general about those conversations. I certainly started my teaching career and went a reasonable way through it before I really thought about, it's a little embarrassing, right? Like before I really thought about, hang on a minute, like how does remembering work, right? We're sort of broadly in the business of helping other small, wonderful humans remember things. And I never really had a conversation with anybody. Nobody really ever taught me anything about how remembering works. And that's pretty essential if you're a teacher. Knowing some things about that is really helpful. And there are, I think, some pretty good bets. You'll have heard me use this language a couple of times now. One of the things that we talk about at Ambition Institute is their learning bets that we're making. We use this language because in education there are no silver bullets and there's nothing that's like 100% sure.
Yeah.
So what we try to do, a little bit like when you're at the races, is like look at the book, which you don't understand, and go through, see what the evidence is telling you, and make the best available choice that you have, right? We don't think you can't make choices, you have to make choices. The economist in me wants everybody to learn about opportunity cost. So like, is thinking about cognitive science in the professional development and how things work in your school a good bet? Like, definitely. My colleague Nick Rose recently wrote an article though about what he calls lethal mutations, and this is something any teacher that's been knocking around the system for a while will be very familiar with. Assessment for learning is a really great example of a lethal mutation. All very well thought through by Dylan William, who is, by all intents and purposes, a leading expert in the field that we work into, and it gets diluted through lots of conversations in schools, often filtered through the accountability system, and assessment for learning turns into pulling lollipop sticks out of a tub. And if you're pulling lollipop sticks out of a tub, then you're doing assessment for learning. Like, that's nonsense. That's not what assessment for learning is. And one of my concerns is that the literature around cognitive science turns into a similar piece. The best way that teachers can avoid that from happening is by becoming more expert in these fields themselves, so they can spot when something is and isn't a lethal mutation. And on dual coding, there's a really great book by Oliver Caviggioli. I've probably mispronounced his surname.
Oliver Caviggioli.
Who's wonderful and has written extensively about that. I've mentioned Peps before. He has a book on called Memorable Teaching, which basically walks through some of the strategies that teachers can use. But ultimately, going back to a previous episode where we talked about expertise, expertise requires lots of domain knowledge. For teachers, that domain knowledge is partly, we call it path knowledge, so the content and the sequence of that content for the subject that you're teaching, but it's also context knowledge. That means knowledge of the pupils that you're teaching, and broadly put, sort of thinking about the thinking of the small humans in front of you. And so in order to genuinely be an expert in your classroom, you need to be putting both of those things into practice alongside broader sort of pedagogical knowledge and knowledge about cognitive and behavioural science. And it is the blend of all of those things and how you bring them together to solve the problem that's in front of you in a given moment. Jimmy isn't understanding the difference between an appreciation and a depreciation in the exchange rate in my case. And so it's on you as a teacher to pull all of that rich knowledge together and apply it to solve the problem that you've got. So helpful things to put in a toolbox to help you think more about it. It is nuts that the profession went for quite a while without thinking about how remembering works, but it's definitely not the silver bullet. Cognitive science doesn't answer lots of important questions. Motivation is one that we've spoken about in a previous episode. It doesn't really tell you how to get kids motivated. But a world where we're not thinking and talking about this stuff is not a helpful one.